Hey, let's make this Sunday a learning experience. Can you tell me how to build one GPT one from scratch?
Building something like GPT-1 from scratch is quite a task, but in essence, you'd start by gathering a large text data set and preparing it, cleaning, tokenizing. Then you'd build a transformer model architecture, basically a stack of self-attention and feed-forward layers. You train it using next word prediction. Given a sequence of words, predict the next one. You'll need a lot of compute. Originally, GPT-1 took GPUs. Finally, you'd evaluate it on language tasks to check its learning patterns. Not a Sunday afternoon project, but it's fun to understand the steps.
Okay, let's start from scratch and understand each step. Like you mentioned about the first, we need text data set. That is important uh, because that text data set is need to be converted into tokens.
Exactly. So step one would be curating a large, diverse data set of text, books, articles, Wikipedia, anything you can legally use. Once you have that, you tokenize it, turning words or subwords into numbers. These tokens are what the model will see. You also create sequences of these tokens to feed into the model. Once that's done, you're ready to move on to model architecture. It's all about feeding the model structured patterns from language.
Okay, once tokens are ready means the raw data that we want to understand our model. And then what next?
Once you have the tokenized sequences, you set up the training process. You build a transformer model, just like GPT-1 did, with self-attention layers that let the model figure out relationships between tokens. Then you train it. The task is, given a sequence, predict the next token. You iterate over your data, adjust model parameters to reduce prediction error, and keep going until it learns meaningful patterns. And finally, you'll have a language model that generates text based on what it's learned.
So what was the second step you mentioned about transformer model? Can you explain in detail that transformer model? So tokens are ready and then
Sure. The transformers are model architecture built around self-attention. Imagine you feed in a sequence of tokens. The self-attention mechanism allows each token to look at other tokens in the sequence and weigh how important they are to it. This is done by computing attention scores, basically how relevant each word is to another. These attention scores help the model understand relationships, context, and meaning. You stack multiple layers of attention and feed-forward networks to refine these patterns. After training, the transformer can generate coherent text based on what it has learned from all those attention-based patterns.
but you mentioned in a very brief way that self-attention mechanism lets tokens to understand the patterns and sequences, and then, but how actually that transformer model works?
At its core, a transformer works by transforming input tokens into contextualized representations. Each token is mapped into an embedding, a vector. The self-attention mechanism then looks at every other token in the sequence. It computes how relevant each token is to the one being processed, using query, key, and value vectors. The attention weights are used to blend information from all tokens. After that, feed-forward layers further transform the data. With multiple layers of this process, the model learns rich contextual dependencies. Finally, a prediction head on top outputs the next token. It's this repeated attention and transformation that makes it powerful.
So what was that self-attention mechanism in its sequence, meaning that you mentioned about query, key, and value.
Right. In self-attention, each token in the sequence is turned into three vectors: a query, a key, and a value. The query asks, what am I looking for? The key says, what do I contain? The attention score between two tokens is basically the query of one token matched against the key of another. Those scores determine how much focus one token should give to others. Then we use those scores to create a weighted sum of the value vectors. Those contain the actual information. In short, each token attends to the others, deciding which parts are important, and then blends their information accordingly.
Okay, then what next? Two steps are completed. Then what third step? Be specific.
The third step is training. Once the architecture is ready, you feed your tokenized sequences into the model. You train it to predict the next token in a sequence. The model adjusts its internal parameters using a process called backpropagation. Basically, it measures how wrong its prediction is and tweaks weights to improve. You iterate this over many batches of data until the model generalizes well. Once training is done, you evaluate it on unseen text. If it predicts well, congratulations, you've built a language model.
The model adjusts its parameter. Can you explain that parameter part with intuition?
Absolutely. Think of these parameters as tiny dials, weights and biases inside the model. At first, they're random, so the model guesses poorly. After it makes a prediction, you measure how wrong it was using something called a loss function. Then, using a method called backpropagation, you figure out how to nudge each dial, each parameter, so the next prediction is closer to correct. Over thousands of iterations, these parameters align to capture patterns, allowing the model to make smart predictions, like learning how language really works.
Over thousands of iterations, this parameter aligns to capture patterns, allowing the model to make smart prediction. Okay, but okay, how things are doing on computing level? I think what they are using it there.
Under the hood, all those operations, attention, predictions, parameter updates, are matrix math. Queries, keys, values, weights are all large matrices. GPUs or even TPUs excel at parallelizing these operations. They multiply big matrices super fast. During training, batches of text sequences are fed in. Forward passes produce predictions, then backward passes compute how to adjust the parameters. Optimization algorithms like Adam nudge those parameters step by step. So, in essence, it's lots of linear algebra running on specialized hardware.
Okay, but you have to give one example so that I can understand the whole pattern.
Imagine you're translating a sentence like the cat sat on the mat. Each word is turned into a vector. The model processes each word by asking, who's important to me? For cat, the attention might focus on sat, the action it does, and mat, where it happens. After passing through layers, the model learns that the cat sat should likely be followed by something like on the mat. Over time, it adjusts its internal dials so it gets better at predicting natural patterns, whether that's next words, answers, or translations.
Okay, first, everything is converted into tokens, and then that tokens is converted into vector, and that vector is really mapping those things using and capturing through the matrix, and that and TPUs are and CPU TPUs and GPUs are performing that matrix multiplication mapping things.
You've nailed it. It's all about turning text into numbers, mapping relationships via matrix operations, and letting GPUs or TPUs crunch those massive calculations. Over time, the model captures patterns and context so it can predict or generate language. That's the magic of a transformer based model.
That's very hard to understand that. Okay, if the sentence you mentioned about the cat sat on the mat, if that whole sentence is converted into matrix, that is what you are suggesting, and that matrix is mapped to something.
Exactly. Each word, like cat, sat, or mat, is turned into a vector of numbers, and those vectors form matrices. The model uses these matrices to figure out relationships, like how cat relates to sat. After processing through layers of attention, it can predict, for example, that a likely continuation of the cat sat is on the mat. So, yes, in a sense, we're mapping language into math to learn patterns.
What about but you are mapping, okay, the initial the cat sat on the mat. Okay, this is the initial token we have, and then we have converted that token into matrix. Then this matrix is mapped to which matrix?
When we convert the tokens into vectors, those vectors form one matrix. Let's call it the input matrix. Now, inside the model, we multiply this input matrix by weight matrices, like those for the query, key, and value. Each multiplication transforms the representation. The self-attention process produces another matrix, your attention-weighted values. Layer by layer, these are multiplied by new weight matrices, refining the meaning. In short, the input matrix is mapped through many learned weight matrices, creating increasingly sophisticated representations until the final matrix predicts the next token.
So this is the all the learning process actually, and then when user asks something like that, they just map those metrics and to the trained matrix and give the answer.
Exactly. Once the model is trained, it's got all those internal weight matrices fine-tuned. When you give it a prompt, it transforms your input into vectors, passes them through those learned weights, and based on patterns it learned, predicts what should come next. So all that training means it can generate meaningful responses by tapping into those captured relationships.
So let's try another example. Suppose I have the definition of vector, a vector which has magnitude and direction, and it's a part of Hilbert space. So how does the whole GPT architecture, GPT-1, perform this thing? Suppose I ask, give example of vector and the definition of vector. So how does the whole process from hardware to software to computational thinking perform?
When you ask for an example of a vector, your words are first turned into tokens and then numerical vectors. These vectors are passed through the trained model's layers. The self-attention mechanism helps the model understand context, like what vector means in a math sense. Internally, huge matrix multiplications happen on GPUs, refining meaning at each layer. The model, having seen countless texts, predicts a coherent, learned response about vectors. So it's math and memory, matrix ops based on patterns from training, delivering a relevant answer.
You skip many things. So I ask, what is vector? So they will refer their training data that do we have trained our model like what is vector? Then those the sentence is converted into tokens, tokens, then vector into matrix, and that matrix layer by layer they map and fine tune that thing.
You're right. The model was trained on vast text, so it's seen many definitions. When you ask what is a vector, your input is tokenized, passed through those learned layers, and the model recalls patterns from training, like how textbooks define vectors. It outputs a definition based on that learned knowledge. So, yes, all that fine tuning during training is why it knows how to explain vector now.
Why there is no confusion? Because there is a huge matrix multiplication mapping uh, is on GPUs, and why they have used GPUs.
GPUs are built for parallel processing. In a transformer, you're dealing with huge matrices, and multiplying them is the core task. GPUs can handle thousands of operations at once, speeding this up massively. Without confusion, it's just following math rules. The model's knowledge is in the trained weights, and the GPU ensures all these massive calculations happen quickly. So it's fast, structured math, and the model's training ensures it stays coherent.
So what you are suggesting that GPUs can handle thousands of operation at once, but doesn't that matrix get lost?
No, the matrix doesn't get lost. It's just a set of numbers, structured data. GPUs handle them methodically, multiplying and adding exactly as defined. The model structure ensures each operation is in place. Attention scores, weight matrices, everything is accounted for. By the end, the output is just another well-defined matrix, no randomness. So it's a controlled flow of math, ensuring nothing is lost.
So another example would be another thing is that if I have if I ask the question again to the large language model, suppose GPT-1, okay, what is neuron? So first, whatever the prompt we have given, text we have given, they will convert into that tokens into vectors, and that vector is mapped to a matrix. First of all, matrix is ready, and then that matrix is again mapped to the similar context from the large amount of data. They will search that how we will map those things, how we'll solve that thing layer by layer, and then if the things are according to that plan, they map, if they match, and they the result matrix is just given as the output.
You've got the broad idea. When you ask what is a neuron, the input is tokenized, yes, and passed through layers. But the model doesn't literally search a database. Instead, it uses its trained weight matrices, patterns learned from all that data. As it moves layer by layer, it's refining meaning, capturing context from training. If the learned patterns fit, it outputs a relevant response. So it's not fetching data, it's dynamically generating based on the patterns it's internalized. And that final matrix gives you your answer.
So it doesn't literally search in the database. Actually, it uses trained weight matrix. So can you explain that part? Trained weight matrices pattern learn from all the data.
When we train the model, it sees countless examples from its data. Each time it predicts and corrects itself, it tweaks millions of internal weights, tiny adjustable numbers. Over time, these weights encode patterns, like what vector or neuron usually means in context. So when you ask a question, it doesn't look back at the data. It uses these weights, like a deeply ingrained intuition, to generate an answer. The patterns live in those weights. No database lookup needed.
But what about that training process we did earlier? So that training processes result in lot of weight matrices like that thing, and then they map that weight matrices to this actual query.
Exactly. During training, the model learns to adjust its weight matrices so that it predicts well. By the end, you have a huge network of trained weights, capturing relationships from all that data. When you ask a question, the input flows through these weight matrices layer by layer, matching the patterns learned. The weights don't search, they transform your query into a meaningful response because the patterns are baked into those weights.
So doesn't that information get lost? Because I think there are numerous vast amount of text data, and that weight might be might be it will give sometime what is neuron and what is vector the same answer, because somehow the weight matrices are same.
It's a good question, but because the model has millions, even billions of weights, each capturing subtle nuances, it can differentiate. The patterns aren't literal answers, they're complex relationships between words, contexts, and meanings. So the model, if well trained, gives distinct answers. Neuron and vector won't get mixed up. It's the sheer scale and complexity of those weights that let it hold on to meaning.
Can you explain how that the learning process occur? Then I am able to understand that mapping a matrix multiplication and query key and the layer normalization etc like stuff. Suppose one example, the complete biological human body, its function and structure. I just want to train that.
Training is like a massive feedback loop. You start with examples, like sentences about the human body. The model predicts something, maybe the next word. You check how wrong it is using a loss function. Then you adjust all those weights slightly so next time it's less wrong. This adjustment uses back propagation, where the error flows backward through the network, updating weights layer by layer. Do this over and over, and the model internalizes patterns about the body. The weights now store those relationships. No rote memory, just refined connections that help it generate sensible answers later.
Okay, can you make conclusion what we have discussed till now?
In short, we explored how building GPT-1 from scratch involves turning text into tokens, tokens into vectors, and then passing those through a transformer, layers of self-attention and matrix multiplications. During training, the model adjusts its weights, like fine-tuning millions of dials, to capture patterns from data. Once trained, it doesn't search a database, it uses those learned patterns to generate meaningful responses. GPUs handle the vast math behind the scenes, ensuring speed and accuracy.
Okay, can you list out the initial development for making GPT-1 like model? What are the core idea, core major breakthrough that leads to such artificial intelligent generative AI model?
The key breakthroughs were first the transformer architecture itself, replacing older sequential models with self attention to capture context efficiently. Second, the availability of large data sets. Language models thrive on scale. Third, massive compute GPUs allowed training at previously impossible scales. Fourth, unsupervised learning. Predicting the next word let models self supervise. Finally, scaling up, realizing that bigger models, trained on more data, kept improving. These core ideas set the stage for generative AI as we know it.
Self attention to capture context efficiently and the availability of large data set language model thrive on scale. Massive compute GPUs allowed training at previously impossible scale, and unsupervised learning predicting the next word let models self supervise. Finally, scaling the bigger model trained on more data kept improving. Okay, these are the bit technical, and can you tell me more about its core development? Because how this generative AI thought first came to someone, so that there might be some computing thing like that in the future that is very.
The roots of generative AI trace back to the dream of creating machines that understand and produce human like language. Early work in the 1950s explored language rules, but a huge leap came from neural networks. In the 2010s, researchers realized if you scale up models and data and use architectures like the transformer, you can teach a model to predict text step by step. That prediction power became generation power. So the core idea was if a model can predict, it can create. And scaling everything unlocked the magic.
Okay, but can you emphasize more on two things like neural network and one thing is like human like language?
Sure, neural networks are essentially layers of interconnected nodes that mimic simplified neurons in the brain. Each layer transforms data, learning patterns through weight adjustments. Now, to produce human like language, we train these networks on huge data sets of human text. As the network learns to predict the next word based on context, it gradually captures the structure, style, and patterns of human language. Over time, it generates text that feels natural because it's learned from countless human examples.
So they thought that a computer can understand the not like here we didn't mention about zeros and one that computer understand in that language.
You're right. Underneath it all, computers still handle zeros and ones, just numbers. But by stacking layers of math, neural networks learn to map those numbers into meaningful patterns. So while the machine just crunches numbers, the result is that it models patterns of human language. In a way, we've built a bridge from binary operations up to something that feels like understanding. It's the scale of patterns learned that creates the illusion of comprehension.
Suppose the word vector, how does the computer understand this word?
The computer doesn't understand in a human sense. It starts with a numerical lookup. The word vector is mapped to a series of numbers, a vector embedding. This embedding captures where vector sits in relation to other words. When the model processes vector, it's just manipulating these numbers through layers of math. Through training, it's learned that vector might appear in certain contexts. So when you ask about it, it's pulling from those learned patterns. No deep understanding, just numbers predicting what makes sense.
What about making? So you didn't mention. Did you mention about that vector is converted into tokens and then tokens into vectors?
Yes, exactly. When you input a vector, the word is first turned into a token, basically an ID number. Then it's mapped to a vector, an array of numbers representing its meaning in context. That vector is what flows through the neural network layers, where all the math happens. So the original word is just a starting point. By the time the model responds, it's all vector math at work.
So when that vector travels through that neural network transformer self-attention mechanism back propagation, during that process, there are many steps that query key and value. Some in each step, some information is being captured. Based on that information, further processes.
Exactly. Each step of the transformer refines the representation. The query key and value mechanisms help each token attend to others, capturing relationships. As the vector moves through layers, it's updated with more context. By the end, the final vectors carry a rich understanding of the input, allowing the model to generate an informed, contextual response.
Okay, thank you.